story, far older, hidden away in ancient scrolls and guarded by generations, gives us a very different starting point. Across deserts, mountains, and seas, cultures have struggled with the same question. Where did we come from? How did all of this begin? From the earliest cave drawings to the most complex theological debates, humanity has never stopped searching for its origin. And yet, buried in Ethiopia, preserved in manuscripts that survived fire, invasion, and centuries of silence, lies a different version of the beginning, one that challenges the West's Genesis-centered creation story. This isn't just about religion. It's about identity, truth, and power, because whoever controls the beginning controls the meaning of life itself. If one book says humanity began in one way, and another book, equally sacred, says it began differently, what does that do to our understanding of ourselves? That's the question that sets this story apart from anything you've ever heard in a Sunday sermon. The Ethiopian Bible is not just a variation of the Western Bible. It is a library of texts, some of which the Western world has never accepted, suppressed, or outright rejected. Books like Enoch, Jubilees, and the full story of Adam and Eve stretch the boundaries of what we thought we knew. When you open these pages, you don't just find familiar verses, you find stories that rewrite the story of creation itself. Imagine a world before time, where angels walked among humans, where creation was not just a single spoken command, but a layered, multi-dimensional act involving heavenly beings and cosmic battles. Imagine that before Genesis, another script had already been written, one that the Ethiopian Bible still preserves. Think about it. The Western Bible we know today has gone through councils, translations, and countless edits. But the Ethiopian tradition has held on to books that the rest of the world abandoned. Why? Did they see something worth protecting? Did they know truths that others tried to erase? And what happens when those hidden truths are brought back to light? The very fact that this alternative story exists means that creation is not a one-dimensional tale. It forces us to face uncomfortable questions. If Genesis is not the only beginning, what else might we have missed? Could there be more to Adam and Eve, more to the fall, more to the very idea of what it means to be human? This is not just history. This is about us, today. We live in a world filled with confusion, endless choices, and constant struggles over truth. People look for meaning in science, in philosophy, in religion, and in themselves. Yet the question of beginnings still haunts us. If the story is incomplete, then so is our understanding of life. And if the Ethiopian Bible holds missing pieces, maybe, just maybe, it also holds the answers we've been searching for. The suspense is not in whether these stories exist. They do. The suspense lies in what they mean and why they were hidden. Were they removed to protect people from truths too heavy to bear? Or were they erased because they gave power to those the world wanted to silence? The answers are not simple, but they matter. Because every person who has ever asked, "Why am I here?" is connected to this mystery. This documentary will walk you through those lost pages. It will take you to the shadowy places where angels and humans met, to the stories of creation before Genesis, and to the cosmic struggles that shaped what we now call the human story. And it will not leave you with easy answers, because the truth rarely comes packaged that way. But before we step into that ancient world, pause for a moment and think about the world we live in right now. Think about how fragile truth has become. In a time when information is everywhere and lies spread faster than facts, the courage to seek the real story is more important than ever. And that is why this journey matters, not just to believers, not just to historians, but to anyone who refuses to live by half-truths. So let's begin, not with Genesis, but with the question before time. What if the story of creation did not start where we've been told? And before we dive deeper into this journey together, I have a small request. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, if you want to be part of uncovering the truths the world has forgotten, then help this channel grow. Subscribe today and help us reach 10,000 subscribers. If you want to show extra support, you can tap the Super Thanks button. It helps keep documentaries like this alive. And I would love to hear from you. Comment below with your name, your city, and the exact time you're watching this. It's a small way for us to see how this hidden history is reaching people across the world. And if you want to go even further, check out the link in the description where you can find the complete 88 Books Ethiopian Bible along with the Book of Enoch. These are not just books, they are windows into a forgotten beginning. One of the most amazing treasures in human history, the Ethiopian Bible, lies far away in the highlands of Africa, in a place that is frequently referred to as the cradle of humanity. The Ethiopian Bible has 81 books, and in some traditions up to 88, in contrast to the well-known Western Bible's 66. This is a much deeper and larger collection of texts, preserving stories that the rest of the world either forgot, ignored, or purposefully left behind. It is not just a matter of a few additional chapters or translations. During the centuries when other countries were rewriting and shrinking the story of God, Ethiopia did more than just inherit these writings. It guarded, protected, and carried them with it. We need to look back to the early centuries of Christianity to see why this is important. There were arguments concerning which books should be included in the sacred canon and which should be left out as the religion of Jesus spread from the Middle East to Europe. After years of debates and councils, the Western Bible's canon was gradually reduced to the 66 books that most people are familiar with today. However, those councils were not devoid of politics and power, nor were they unanimous. Decisions were made, and whole books were discarded as a result. Isaiah's Ascension, Jubilees, the Book of the Shepherd, Enoch, and the entire account of Adam and Eve were all deemed too bizarre, too mystical, or too perilous to continue, but Ethiopia took a different route. Christianity arrived in the region long before the name of Christ was even known in most of Europe. Their roots go all the way back to the first generation of believers, according to Ethiopian tradition, who received the gospel through a royal servant who was baptized by Philip in the book of Acts. The Ethiopian church flourished in its own soil after those roots took hold, protected by its separation from the power struggles of Constantinople and Rome, and fed by its own culture. It was also free to preserve books that others rejected because of its distance. It was no accident that this was preserved. It was deliberate. These texts were copied, studied, prayed over, and passed down through the generations by Ethiopian monks. Stories that were rejected by Western leaders were valued by them. They understood that the expanded lives of Adam and Eve, the stories of angels and watchers, and the mysteries of creation all contained truths about the nature of the universe and humanity. They believed that taking away these books would silence the voices that God meant to be heard. Therefore, Ethiopia was maintaining the library while the West was reducing its canon. Consider the magnitude of this disparity. While the Book of Enoch was read alongside Genesis in Ethiopia, a Western believer might not have heard of it growing up. While Ethiopians had whole works that depicted heaven and earth in greater detail, a Western Christian might believe that the Bible ends neatly with revelation. This distinction shapes imagination as much as theology. It alters one's perception of God, the universe, angels, and even the purpose of humanity. Then, why did Ethiopia broaden its narrative while the West shrunk it? Part of the solution is in control. The Western Church was intertwined with political power, kings and empires. Power came from simplicity. It is easier to control belief, preach a single story, and preserve unity under a single voice when there are fewer books. Suspicious was anything that hinted at a more intricate creation, a more profound function for angels, or a broader view of heaven. In contrast, the Ethiopian church was not compelled to conform to Roman law. Its people, monasteries, and land-based heritage were its main sources of strength. Ethiopia saw revelation where Rome saw danger. Ethiopia became a defender of secret wisdom as a result. Its Bible is more than just longer. It contains hints of a world before Genesis and stories that suggest creation was a multi-layered process, rather than a single act. Texts like Enoch, which allude to wars in the heavens long before Adam ever set foot on earth, tell of angels who descended and imparted forbidden knowledge to humanity. Jubilees connect heaven and earth through sacred calendars, mapping time itself in cycles and rhythms that give the universe order. By portraying humanity's first parents as living beings, grappling with guilt, mercy, and redemption, rather than as silent characters in a short story, the Book of Adam and Eve deepens our understanding of their grief, struggle, and hope. Ethiopia refused to destroy them, so all of this was kept intact. These stories are dismissed as myths or legends by many Westerners who view them as apocryphal curiosities. However, in Ethiopian tradition, they are foundations rather than footnotes. They hold the seeds of mysteries that predate Genesis, secrets that contradict the limited conception of the beginning held by the Western world. It is impossible to exaggerate the importance of this preservation. Imagine a library where half of the shelves are empty, but another library retains the entire collection. Youngsters who grew up with the smaller library will think they know everything and never understand how much was lost. However, the stories found in the Ethiopian library stretch the boundaries of the imagination. According to them, the history of humanity extends beyond a few beginnings and into worlds where angels descend, heaven and earth collide, and creation serves as both a battlefield and a garden. It is no coincidence that Ethiopia is the custodian of these texts. It has a strong connection to its identity as a country that fought colonization and as a place that has always valued its independence. Foreign empires have repeatedly attempted but failed to subjugate Ethiopia. Its scriptures remained unaltered, just as its land remained free. Ethiopia remembered while Rome rewrote. Ethiopia preserved while Europe debated. Ethiopia carried memory like fire concealed beneath ashes while others forgot. Furthermore, this memory is more than just written words. It concerns a worldview, a perspective on God and the universe. When Ethiopians read their Bible, they are entering mysteries that span time, space, and heaven. They are also reading history. They hear truths about themselves in voices that have been silenced elsewhere. For this reason, the Ethiopian Bible is important to everyone who wants to comprehend the human story, not just academics or priests. Ethiopian tradition subtly carries these seeds of pre-Genesis mysteries, reminding us that the origin story was never as straightforward as we were taught. One picture of Genesis is provided by the Western world, but Ethiopia has preserved a more expansive, profound, and eerie version. A more complete truth is hidden somewhere in between them, just waiting to be discovered by those who are prepared to hear both sides. Time itself was something much more subtle but fundamental before the earth, sky, and first spark of light appeared in the emptiness. Ethiopian tradition holds that time is the very beginning of creation rather than a byproduct. It is said to be the first action that God took and the foundation that everything else would eventually fit into. Nothing could grow, be measured, or even exist sequentially without time. In this way, time served as the soil that would eventually be used to plant the seeds of creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, is a common opening statement in the Western world. However, the Ethiopian viewpoint poses a more profound query. What exactly is a beginning? A beginning suggests that something has already started, a before and an after, a first instance that distinguishes history from eternity. Time itself must have existed beforehand, or at least been brought forth as the first act, if creation has a beginning. This alters our perspective on Genesis. The story is about the divine establishment of order, where time itself serves as the initial barrier between God's eternal existence and the development of creation. It is not just about material objects appearing out of nothing. This idea is echoed in Ethiopian texts and the Book of Enoch, which frequently describe cosmic rhythms that predate the earth, as well as heavenly calendars and cycles of days, months, and years. According to Enoch's visions, the sun and moon's paths are spiritual laws, patterns woven into the universe from the very beginning, rather than just physical descriptions. In addition to providing light, the sun's rise signifies sacred time. In addition to being beautiful, the moon's waxing and waning establishes heavenly cycles that unite heaven and earth. Enoch believed that these rhythms existed before Adam took his first breath and before humans ever set foot on earth. According to this perspective, God painted creation on time as the first canvas. This concept also discusses the difference between measurable time and eternity. According to Ethiopian belief, eternity is the domain of God, the eternal state in which there is only the divine's constant presence and no before or after. But God gives creation time so that history, development, and change can take place. While God exists outside of time and holds all moments simultaneously, humans live in it. This viewpoint deepens our understanding of our lives. Every second that goes by is not arbitrary. Rather, it is a component of a rhythm that was predetermined at the beginning of time. Time is a sacred gift with a purpose. It is more than just a ticking clock. The fact that this aligns with contemporary scientific ideas only serves to highlight how remarkable this is. The Big Bang Theory, which holds that space and time came into being simultaneously, is in line with the notion that time itself was created. The universe is described by physicists as space-time itself expanding from a singularity rather than matter appearing in empty space. There was no before in the conventional sense prior to that singularity. There was no background of time waiting for matter to fill it, no ticking clock. Essentially, creation marked the beginning of time. Modern science has verified what Ethiopian tradition has preserved in sacred language through mathematical formulas and observations of the cosmos. This connection is further strengthened by Einstein's theory of relativity. It demonstrates how time is not fixed, but rather entwined with space, bending and stretching in response to motion and gravity. This is in line with the Ethiopian belief that time is dynamic, responsive, and intricately linked to the universe, rather than being merely a series of moments. Although Enoch's explanation of divine laws governing star motion may seem idealistic, contemporary physics demonstrates that the structure of space-time does, in fact, influence the motion of all celestial bodies. In a symbolic sense, the ancient texts were pointing to a truth that science would discover thousands of years later. However, science cannot match the depths of the Ethiopian Bible. It implies that time is a spiritual reality rather than just one aspect of the cosmos. The purpose of the calendars that were shown to Enoch is to align with divine order, not merely to mark the passing of time. According to this perspective, people coexist peacefully with heaven when time is managed appropriately. Chaos arises when time is tainted, when holy days are disregarded, when divine rhythms are disrupted. This concept portrays time as holy rather than neutral. Each hour has significance. A covenant is reflected in each lunar cycle. Time is a gift to be treasured, not a prison to be broken. This viewpoint also alters our perception of our own lives. Our lives are not random occurrences amidst chaos. If time was the initial act of creation, every moment fits into a larger pattern than the earth itself. Therefore, wasting time is a spiritual loss rather than just being lazy. One can become closer to the divine by respecting time and living in harmony with its flow. Ethiopians believe that by observing sacred time, they can stay in harmony with the Creator, which is why they keep prayers, fasts, and celebrations precisely timed to the cycles of the heavens. The idea that time was God's initial gift to creation also has an eerie beauty. Moments unfolded before matter, before light, before even the separation of heaven and earth, and God could say, "Let there be," into that unfolding. Instead of resonating into emptiness, God's voice reverberated into time, and time carried the command forward, enabling the universe to blossom. This changes the way we interpret even the most straightforward passage of Scripture. "In the beginning" is no longer merely an introductory phrase. Rather, it makes a profound statement about the origin of time and the point at which eternity meets history. The Ethiopian Bible serves as a reminder that creation is about the order of things as much as what was created. There cannot be a story, development, or redemption without time. Time allows for the writing of futures, the unfolding of history, and the forgiveness of mistakes. Because of this, time is a sacred stage that God has created rather than merely a neutral one. This gift is the foundation of even our sense of waiting and our desire for the future. To experience time passing is to be a part of creation itself. The Ethiopian texts give us meaning, while science provides us with equations to measure time. One demonstrates how time bends with gravity, while the other demonstrates how time bends toward eternity. When taken as a whole, they depict time as both the initial creation and the silent observer of all subsequent creations. It existed before heaven and earth, and it will persist until the last day when time is gathered back into eternity. The heavens themselves were conceived as the abodes of divine order in the earliest conceptions of creation, before the earth was shaped and humanity was created. According to Ethiopian traditions, there are several heavens with distinct roles and purposes, rather than a single sky. These heavens were not empty or quiet. They were ablaze with light, sound, and motion, ready to receive the powers that would rule the material and spiritual realms. These early narratives depict a complex architecture of creation, a universe constructed with purpose and design, where each heaven represented a stage of divine unfolding, in contrast to later simplified depictions of a far-off heaven. Before the history of humanity even began, the heavens were enormous canvases of light that were woven into the very fabric of eternity. The first beings, made of fire and brilliance rather than flesh, arose from this divine architecture. According to Ethiopian tradition, angels were ferocious beings of light and flame, rather than kind beings with delicate wings. They were charged with carrying out the Creator's will throughout the developing universe, embodying both majesty and purpose. These angels were made of things that are inaccessible to humans: fire that illuminates without destroying, light that burns but does not devour. Their very existence was an expression of pure power molded into consciousness, reflecting the divine order. Some were made to guide the stars, some to protect the heavens, and some to act as messengers between worlds. They serve as a living link between the perfection of heaven and the impending imperfection of the earth, bridging the gap between the infinite and the finite. Soon, hierarchy became essential to their way of life. The angels were ranked similarly to the heavens, with each role revealing the hierarchy of divine authority. The highest orders were closest to the Creator's throne, shining with a brilliance that overshadowed everyone below. Lower orders spread outward, acting as messengers, watchers, and guardians to make sure that no aspect of creation was neglected or unsupervised. Ethiopian texts place a strong emphasis on this order, depicting a universe in which everything was in order and each creature served a purpose within the larger scheme of things. Each angel was entrusted with preserving equilibrium over enormous swaths of reality. So this hierarchy was not just about power. Among these celestial hosts, some were particularly notable for their devotion and the legends associated with their names. Michael, the heavenly warrior, represented power and a resolute upholding of divine law. His name, which translates to "who is like God," was a challenge and a question for anyone who dared to disobey the order created at creation. In each version, Michael was portrayed as the great guardian of both heaven and humanity, sent to protect those who followed the precarious path of faith. His sword served as both a weapon and a representation of the blazing light that upheld morality in the face of evil. The messenger, Gabriel, represented inter-realm communication. Gabriel's power, in contrast to Michael's fiery strength, lay in his ability to convey words straight from heaven to earth with clarity. In Ethiopian tradition, he played a significant role because it was through him that prophets and nations heard the voice of the Creator. By serving as a link between divine ideas and human comprehension, he made sure that revelation was never completely lost to time or masked by distance. The idea that truth itself is a living force that moves, speaks, and demands to be heard is reflected in his appearance in the stories. The role of Raphael, the healer, was softer but no less potent. Raphael restored where Gabriel revealed, and Michael defended. He was there to bandage both physical and spiritual wounds. According to Ethiopian literature, he was a restorer and a reminder that divine order included compassion and rebirth in addition to judgment and command. He served as a protector of sacred sites and healing waters, demonstrating the knowledge that creation was never meant to be left in agony, but always provided the chance for recovery. However, one of these loyalists deviated from the norm. Once a figure of unparalleled brilliance, Lucifer was a tragic figure in the story of the heavens. His beauty and authority were unparalleled, having been crafted from the same light and fire as his brethren. However, his arrogance made him yearn for the Creator's throne, which was never his. Ethiopian customs view this rebellion as more than just a story of conceit. It serves as a reminder that even light-bearers can become shadowy when they lose sight of their role in the harmony of creation. The fall of Lucifer upset the harmony of the heavens, creating a rift in the cosmos that reverberated throughout the earth. Because he refused to accept the equilibrium that had been set up from the start, his rebellion turned him from a light-bearer to an enemy. The tension within creation itself is also revealed in the tale of Lucifer's rebellion. Why could there have been such a disturbance if the heavens were created with perfect order? According to Ethiopian interpretations, the divine plan included freedom for angels as well. Loyalty would be meaningless without choice, and obedience would be meaningless without the potential for rebellion. And as a result, the heavens themselves turned into a theater of choice, where creatures of light and fire had to decide whether to turn away from the harmony they were born into or stay in line with the Creator. Because it created the potential for division, conflict, and spiritual warfare, this struggle in the unseen realms influenced the fate of the seen world. These tales give rise to a framework of meaning, rather than just a far-off myth. The layered heavens serve as a reminder that creation is multifaceted and far richer than what the human eye can see. The hierarchy of angels teaches that all beings have a part to play in preserving equilibrium, and that authority is correlated with accountability, Raphael's healing, Gabriel's message, and Michael's strength all represent values that speak to people who are looking for safety, direction, and healing. The fall of Lucifer serves as a warning about the perils of arrogance, the temptation to stray from one's purpose, and the repercussions of disobeying harmony. According to this vision, the creation of the heavens and the angelic orders is a continuous reality rather than just a historical event. The heavens continue to exist as stratified worlds above, inhabited by invisible forces whose deeds have an impact on humanity. This understanding is maintained in the Ethiopian texts, which depict a dynamic, orderly universe full of beings of light and fire, rather than a universe of silence and emptiness. This understanding permanently shapes the story of creation and its unfolding journey. Conflict had already broken out in the invisible worlds before the first human being was ever created from the dust of the earth. Ethiopian traditions stress that rebellion had already begun among the beings of light before Adam opened his eyes. Despite the fact that the creation story is frequently presented as though harmony had existed from the beginning. Once radiant and exalted, Lucifer turned into a symbol of arrogance that endangered the divine order. Among the angelic hosts, he was unparalleled in both beauty and authority, but what started out as glory ultimately became the source of his demise. He developed a desire in his heart to rule rather than to serve, to absorb the Creator's light and claim it as his own. Pride turned the brightest of angels into the mastermind behind disobedience, a character whose life would influence human history before humanity even existed. Lucifer's uprising was a growing storm rather than a single incident. According to Ethiopian texts, he used words of ambition and discontent to influence many of his fellow angels to join him in his defiance. As creatures of fire and light, he said it was unfair for them to submit to the Creator's will or to be placed second in the divine hierarchy. He believed that he was deserving of the throne and that his reign would strengthen creation more than the predetermined eternal plan. This was an attempt to alter the fundamental structure of the universe. Not just disobedience, Lucifer demonstrated how freedom, even in the divine realm, permitted the possibility of choice. Choices that would have an impact on eternity by persuading others to follow him. According to the Ethiopian perspective, rebellion is portrayed as both conceited and purposely corrupt. Angels were made to uphold law and order, act as messengers and protectors, and preserve the harmony of the universe. Lucifer and his followers rebelled and gave up their nature. They became distortions of their original light, no longer what they were intended to be. The rebellion shattered harmony in the heavens, causing this metamorphosis to be both spiritual and cosmic. Loyalty and treachery now stood in stark contrast to one another in what had once been a place of unadulterated unity. The revolt showed that when pride overshadowed devotion, there was a chance of discord even in the midst of perfection. The ensuing conflict was referred to as a war in the heavens. Those who had chosen rebellion faced off against forces loyal to the Creator, led by individuals like Michael. According to Ethiopian customs, this was a massive upheaval that reverberated throughout the stratified heavens. Fire and fire, light and light, engaged in a struggle that is beyond description. The rebellion was about authority, power and devotion to the truth, rather than about material weapons. "Who is like God?" exclaimed Michael. Became a reminder that no created being could ever claim equality with the Creator, as well as a challenge. The first major split in the universe was caused by this celestial conflict, which predicted the difficulties that would arise on Earth. This rebellion had dire repercussions. Once radiant, the vanquished angels were expelled from the heavens. They were stripped of their former splendor and turned into enemies of the divine order they had disapproved of. Their fall is described in Ethiopian texts as a curse and an exile, a break from the light source they once represented. They shifted from being defenders of peace to being agents of chaos, determined to destroy creation wherever they could. Their expulsion was not only a form of discipline, but also a necessity, because their disobedience could not continue to splinter the order of heaven. However, their downfall did not diminish their power. Rather, it refocused it on the undeveloped realms. Although this conflict predated humanity, its consequences were bound to influence human life. The conflict between loyalty and rebellion was already present in the world when Adam was later created. Humanity was born into a battlefield where invisible forces were already at work, not into a universe that was neutral. The Ethiopian viewpoint emphasizes that angelic disobedience, not humankind, was the source of sin. When Adam and Eve had to make their own decision, they were entering a drama that had started long before them, because pride, envy, and rebellion had already scarred creation. Significant concerns regarding freedom and fate are also brought up by the existence of rebellion. Before humanity, why did Lucifer have the freedom to disobey the Creator? Why did angels, beings of light, have the ability to turn away from the source of their existence? According to Ethiopian texts, this freedom was necessary because devotion would be meaningless without the potential for rejection. Without choice, loyalty would be meaningless and more like a reflection than a genuine connection. In this way, Lucifer's rebellion was an inevitable test of creation rather than an accident. It revealed the truth that even the closest beings to the divine have to decide between pursuing the path of self-exaltation and maintaining harmony. The heavens themselves learned a lesson from the seeds of rebellion as well. By avoiding Lucifer's temptation, the obedient angels more fully confirmed their commitment and mission. The battle in heaven was not just one of devastation, but also of refinement, a trial that showed who would be strong and who would be weak. Because the angels who stayed faithful did so voluntarily rather than under duress, the order of heaven was subsequently reinforced. The consequences of this rebellion, however, were long-lasting because the enemies were not eliminated, but rather left to stand as warnings about the consequences of arrogance and disobedience. Their very existence guaranteed that spiritual strife would always loom over creation. Ethiopian customs emphasize that this conflict was permitted as part of the unfolding story of existence and was not concealed from the Creator. Rebellion was woven into the story as a contrast that allowed loyalty to shine, just as time itself was created as a gauge of change and advancement. The fallen enemies became a part of a greater drama, setting the stage for the journey of humanity. This ancient uprising was echoed by the serpent that would later approach Eve in the garden. It was a continuation of the same pride that had attempted to topple the heavens. Therefore, the spiritual conflict was already in progress before humanity. The seeds of disobedience planted in Lucifer's heart grew into a movement that changed the very path of creation. The first major rift in the universe was caused by the fall of the angels, a rebellion that resulted from deliberate pride rather than ignorance. It created the potential for dishonesty, corruption, and division. Evil did not originate with the fall of humanity. Rather, it was the extension of evil into the material world. Ethiopian scriptures remind us that the conflict between loyalty and disobedience, light and darkness, actually started long before Eden, in the worlds of fire and light, where angels themselves made their decisions. This knowledge changes our perspective on the human story. Adam and Eve were the inheritors of a conflict that had already begun, not the creators of sin. The temptations they encountered had their roots in a rebellion that existed before they were even born. With centuries of disobedience and resentment, the enemy who whispered to Eve was already a fallen creature. From the moment of its birth, humanity entered a conflict that had already shaped the heavens. Human history would unfold under the shadow of an ancient war because the seeds of rebellion had already taken root. Something more than mere physical illumination appeared when the words, "Let there be light," were uttered. The sun's radiance, the moon's reflection, or the glittering constellations that covered the night sky were not the light that initially pervaded creation. Later in the story, those celestial bodies would make an appearance. Rather, it was a different kind of light, something much deeper. It was eternal, spiritual, and inextricably linked to God's presence. The Ethiopian perspective highlights that it was not matter but essence, not a physical spark, but divine radiance that announced the Creator's existence and power, that initially broke the silence of creation. This light was life, knowledge, and order pouring into a dark, formless emptiness. It is important to distinguish between spiritual and physical light. Physical light is limited by space and time. It can be measured and divided, it rises and falls, and it travels over distance. But spiritual light is unrestricted. It possesses the essence of eternity and is impervious to fading or extinguishment. When the Creator said, "Let there be light," He meant more than just lighting up the universe. He meant to fill it with His own energy. This event is frequently interpreted in Ethiopian traditions as the revelation of divine wisdom, the understanding, light that unites the chaos. In this way, meaning and truth were the starting points of creation rather than shapes and forms. Nothing else could be coherent without this light. There is also significant symbolic significance in the choice to distinguish the origin of light from the later formation of the sun, moon, and stars. There would be no reason for the order of creation to postpone the appearance of that celestial body if the first light had only been physical and connected to the sun. However, in order to show that true light is independent of physical structures, the Creator decided to reveal a light before all other visible sources of illumination. This divine light, which shines apart from the universe, serves as a reminder to creation that life and clarity come from beyond the material world rather than from within it. The Ethiopian Bible emphasizes this as a purposeful act. Light was made to come before and surpass the luminaries, demonstrating that reality is maintained by God's presence even when there is no natural order. This initial light is frequently associated with the divine presence itself in Ethiopian thought, as an expression of God's glory shining into creation. The brilliance that makes the hidden visible and the invisible visible was the light of revelation. This light showed the newly formed universe the Creator's will, just as the rising sun reveals what the night hides. It brought about the division of light and darkness, a theme that would recur throughout the Bible as the never-ending conflict between righteousness and disobedience, truth and falsehood. The Ethiopian texts stress that the establishment of moral and spiritual order was more important at this time than just brightness. Light is always a representation of wisdom, truth, and the divine presence that directs creation toward its goal. Additionally, this spiritual light has significant human ramifications. Spiritual life cannot exist without divine illumination, just as physical life cannot flourish without the sun. According to the Ethiopian viewpoint, the first light was a premonition of the enlightenment that God would grant His creation. It serves as a reminder that no matter how much progress humanity made materially, it would still stumble in the dark without divine wisdom. Therefore, the first light was the basis for both spiritual destiny and the start of physical existence. It was God's way of stating that moral and ethical standards, in addition to natural laws, must govern the universe. The division of light from darkness is described as an act of divine sovereignty in the Ethiopian Book of Jubilees and other ancient texts. It was the establishment of dominion rather than just the delineation of boundaries. Light stood for understanding, clarity, and the manifestation of divine will, while darkness symbolized disorder, uncertainty, and opposition to order. By directing light into being, God was establishing control over the empty space and announcing that his everlasting plan would govern creation rather than chaos. The foundation of a pattern where God's will slashes through chaos to provide order and significance was the first great act of dominion. With its understanding of the universe's beginnings, modern science finds an intriguing resonance with this idea. According to physicists, the universe was awash with radiation before stars and galaxies formed. Light itself existed before matter was shaped into suns and planets. Though in a more profound and symbolic manner, the Ethiopian interpretation is consistent with this understanding. The Ethiopian narrative characterizes light as presence and wisdom, whereas the scientific narrative characterizes it as energy and photons. However, both concur that light existed before the structures that produce it today. In this way, the biblical story is not at all archaic. Rather, it captures a profound reality that contemporary science is only now starting to understand. Light, in one form or another, was the first sign of creation. Prophecy and spiritual instruction are also included in the symbolism of this light. The first light of creation is clearly echoed in later biblical writings that refer to the Messiah as the true light that gives light to everyone. This connection is not coincidental according to Ethiopian tradition. A premonition of the divine, illumination that would eventually manifest in human form, the first light was both literal and prophetic. The arrival of divine wisdom in human history would enable human redemption, just as the first light allowed order in creation. According to the Ethiopian perspective, these instances are interwoven with creation, revelation, and salvation via the symbol of light, forming a continuous thread. The Ethiopian Bible also emphasizes that the first light was an extension of God, rather than something outside of him. This light was more akin to an emanation, a radiance that revealed the Creator, without being distinct from him, in contrast to the sun, which was created as an object. It is frequently referred to as the brightness that envelops God's presence and permeates the heavens, or the light of the divine throne. This interpretation distinguishes between the manifestation of divine glory and created objects. When God said, "Let there be light," he was giving creation a glimpse of himself rather than creating something strange. The first awareness of the universe was of divine majesty shining forth, not of shapes or colors. This divine light also symbolizes knowledge that is concealed from the arrogant but made visible to the humble in Ethiopian text symbolism. Spiritual light opens the heart and mind to truth, just as physical light enables the eyes to see. Therefore, the first act of creation was not just about making the world visible, it was also about making wisdom available. The ability to see, understand, and discriminate was God's first gift to his creation. Everything else would have been pointless without this light. According to the Ethiopian perspective, light is essential for both seeing and comprehending creation. As the story progresses, the sun, moon, and stars' creation eventually assumes a role of its own in keeping time and supporting life. However, the fact that light existed before these bodies guarantees that creation will never be reliant on them alone. The Ethiopian viewpoint serves as a reminder that light comes from a divine, not a natural source. The spiritual light would continue to guide creation and provide wisdom to those who seek it, even if the sun were to fade. This fact emphasizes the timeless significance of the first command. Let there be light, It was not only the proclamation of physical existence, but also the understanding that God's wisdom and presence would always be the guiding light of everything. The first light endures throughout the ages in this way. It reverberates throughout human history as a symbol of God's constant presence and is not limited to the first day of creation. This light remains before and beyond the sun, reminding humanity that the deepest illumination comes not from the stars above, but from the eternal presence that spoke them into being. The voice of creation can still be heard wherever truth is revealed, where wisdom dispels ignorance, and where hope breaks into despair. Let there be light. According to the prehistoric imagination preserved in Ethiopian writings, the Earth's formation was a deliberate act of design, with each layer, border, and division having a specific function. The Earth itself was being prepared as a home and a stage for the future development of humanity before man ever breathed. According to the Ethiopian Bible and related texts, the Earth's foundations were built upon invisible pillars. The firmament stretched like a huge canopy, and the deep waters formed a mystical yet orderly creation. In this vision, the Earth was a living, meaningful realm that was balanced between heaven above and the deep below, rather than just a rock suspended in space. According to Ethiopian tradition, the waters are the primordial waters of life, rather than just rivers or oceans. The Creator asserted sovereignty by separating these waters, which are described as both vast and immeasurable, chaotic and creative. Waters without boundaries were given order when they were positioned above and below, and the firmament was summoned to separate them. The firmament itself is depicted as being more substantial than the contemporary imagination frequently permits, a dome that stretches across the emptiness, gleaming like crystal, shielding the earth below and keeping the waters above at bay. This illustration of the firmament as a powerful structure highlights the ability of God's word to create barriers where none previously existed. According to the Ethiopian texts, the earth rests on pillars beneath this firmament. Although these pillars are invisible to the naked eye, they represent stability and strength. Ancient texts repeatedly mention the earth's foundations, frequently in relation to the concepts of justice and stability. The earth cannot survive without the divine foundations upon which it was built, just as a house cannot stand without solid supports. These pillars serve as a reminder that creation is maintained on purpose rather than by accident, and that the order we perceive is derived from a more profound reality that is upheld by the will of the Creator. This picture of pillars also conveys to Ethiopians the idea that the earth is not floating aimlessly, but is instead securely fixed and kept steady by the chaos all around it. The layered nature of creation is also emphasized in Ethiopian thought. The earth is a component of a larger structure that includes depths and heavens rather than existing as a solitary sphere. There are several heavens above the firmament, each with its own order and populated by angels who serve the divine. The waters of the deep, sometimes referred to as the abyss, are a mysterious and potentially dangerous place located beneath the earth. Humanity is positioned in the center, on a tested and protected planet that hovers between worlds of light and dark. The cosmic drama revealed by this mystical arrangement of the earth and heavens shows how closely the human story is tied to realities that are not immediately visible. Images of the sea boundaries are also preserved in the Ethiopian Bible. Everything might have been submerged by the waters, but God told them to assemble where they were, making dry land emerge. This act of separation was symbolic as well as geographical. While the land, which was meant to be the home of humans, was summoned from beneath the sea, which is frequently connected to chaos, the sea was given boundaries. The Creator is the one who establishes boundaries for the infinite and creates order out of the unformed according to Ethiopian imagination. The land itself turns into sacred territory, a present ready for those who will eventually set foot on it. According to Ethiopian tradition, the earth's shape is frequently explained in terms of harmony and balance, a pattern reflecting divine. Wisdom can be seen in the rising of mountains, the gathering of waters, the stretching of the firmament, and the four corners. The earth's design is symmetrical, intentional, and full of indications of order rather than random. Rivers traverse the land like veins, feeding it for future generations, while the mountains rise as pillars pointing toward heaven. Every aspect of creation is written as a conscious act, with each component setting the stage for the arrival of humanity. Ethiopian literature, like the Book of Enoch, also provides insights into the Earth's ethereal geography. They tell of passageways where the sun and moon travel in their courses, of chambers where the waters are kept, of storehouses of winds and treasures of snow. Despite being poetic, these descriptions have deep significance. They serve as a reminder that the natural world is both physical and spiritual, and that there is a divine order underlying the seasons and river flows. The earth is full of mysteries. In this vision, all of which point to the wisdom of the Creator, even the invisible, like rain held in reservoirs or winds kept in celestial chambers, are woven into the fabric of creation and await God's release for the sake of life on earth. The idea of justice is closely related to the Ethiopian concept of the earth's foundations. Human life is intended to be based on the principles of righteousness and truth, just as the earth is supported by pillars. The consistency of God's character is reflected in the consistency of creation. The very foundations would be shaken if that order were broken, whether by disobedience on earth or rebellion in heaven. In this sense, the moral universe is reflected in the structure of creation. The solid, stable earth itself exhorts people to coexist peacefully with the divine order that upholds it. From a different angle, the earth as a stage highlights the fact that creation was never intended to exist for its own sake. According to the Ethiopian Bible, the earth's formation was a prelude to humanity's arrival and was a part of a greater drama. The fertile land, rivers, mountains and seas were all placed there as the backdrop for the human story, not just as scenery. While the earth was formed and structured before man and woman were created, much like a stage is constructed before the actors arrive. Every aspect of this preparation conveys a sense of purpose, as if creation itself was awaiting the right moment to introduce its main characters. Additionally, the imagery of the earth's foundations has prophetic meaning. The creation story contains hints of future renewal in many Ethiopian texts. God would eventually restore the world after human rebellion and corruption, just as the earth was formed from chaos and darkness into stability and order. The earth's foundations, which remain solid in the face of storms and upheavals, represent the unwavering hope that creation will not be undone. Because its foundations are based on divine will, human failure will not destroy the stage set for humanity. This belief connects the beginnings of creation with the promise of restoration, igniting hope in Ethiopian imaginations. According to Ethiopian tradition, the mystical arrangement of the earth and heavens depicts a world in which each division has meaning and each layer of creation serves a purpose. A cosmic architecture includes the pillars beneath the earth, the firmament spanning the sky, the sea boundaries, and the waters above and below. Humanity is positioned at the center of this framework and called to coexist peacefully with the order that keeps things going. The earth is portrayed as a sacred stage, meticulously constructed and ready for the realization of God's plan with humanity at its center, rather than as a random planet among innumerable stars. This vision, which reminds us that the very earth we walk on bears echoes of eternal design and divine craftsmanship, is not only timeless, but also ancient. Ethiopian texts and apocryphal writings allude to a universe that was already teeming with life and movement long before Adam was created from earthly dust. According to these writings, the world as we know it today was not created in its entirety at once, but rather as a continuation and a fresh start following earlier attempts that had, in some cases, failed. The idea of pre-Adamic worlds provides insight into mysteries that are rarely discussed in the Bible. These traditions held that God's creative plan encompassed realms where creatures of all kinds might have lived, thrived, and in some cases fallen, going beyond a single beginning. It appears that the universe was a series of well-planned activities rather than a single experiment, each of which prepared the way for the emergence of humanity. Subtle allusions to the existence of beings who lived on Earth or in other realms prior to Adam can be found in the Ethiopian Bible and in books like the Book of Enoch and Jubilees. According to some accounts, these beings were luminous, angelic, or even hybrid in nature, indicating that creation was more intricate and multi-layered than the well-known story of Genesis alone can explain. Even though these creatures may have been guided by God, the specifics of their lives are purposefully left ambiguous, suggesting tales that were either forgotten or purposefully concealed in order to maintain a larger scheme. The concept of pre-Adamic worlds casts doubt on the notion that humanity was the sole focus of creation, suggesting that various forms of life may have existed on the earth before the appearance of man. The larger, ancient world was not wholly unfamiliar with such ideas. For instance, myths from Mesopotamia describe earlier creations and the gods' repeated attempts to mold the universe or humanity. Before arriving at a final stable order, divine beings in the Enuma Elish battle with primordial waters and past forms of existence. In a similar vein, Egyptian cosmology depicts cycles of creation, in which the gods repeatedly create life before withdrawing to make room for new generations of creatures. Despite having a different theological framework, the Ethiopian texts speak to these ancient concepts by offering a layered, cyclical, and richly detailed picture of creation that is full of hidden histories. These similarities suggest a culturally universal understanding that the world we live in is a part of a continuum, a universe that bears the scars of earlier attempts at order. Intriguing queries concerning humanity's purpose are also brought up by the possibility of pre-Adamic worlds. Why did God decide to begin again with humanity if there were other beings before Adam? According to Ethiopian tradition, the failure of earlier creations might have been caused by imbalance, disobedience, or an inability to accurately reflect divine intention. These earlier worlds lacked the special ability that Adam would bring, the capacity to make deliberate decisions and to interact with God in ways that were relational, contemplative, and intentional. They were not necessarily corrupt in the sense that later sin is defined, though. Informed by lessons learned from previous stages of creation, humanity was created as a new opportunity, a purposeful act in which divine purpose could unfold with new potential. The texts imply that this choice to start anew was profoundly deliberate rather than just practical. Adam was presented as the pinnacle, a creature created to live on a prepared earth that was already ordered and infused with the knowledge of life before Adam. The firmament, the waters, the heavens, and the spiritual worlds had already been tried and tested. All that was left was a living steward who could move through this world, interact with it, and ultimately decide its moral and spiritual course. According to the Ethiopian viewpoint, Adam is not only the first human, but also the heir to a creation that is already rich in history. He is a person who carries on the possibility of harmony that earlier worlds were unable to fully achieve. Angelic realms are also mentioned in relation to beings prior to Adam. According to certain Ethiopian texts, fallen angels interacted with pre-Adamic worlds and impacted the results of earlier creations. It's possible that these encounters caused chaos, which prompted the choice to create humanity under different circumstances. The story of Adam and Eve is not isolated in this context. Rather, it is intricately woven into a larger cosmic history. The existence of past worlds and beings frames the human experience as a continuum, with lessons learned from past cycles guiding humanity's moral and spiritual struggles. In this way, Adam's world is a chance to complete a design that previous iterations could only partially realize, as well as a continuation and correction. Our understanding of time is also called into question by the potential existence of pre-Adamic worlds. Ethiopian texts suggest a temporal depth that extends well beyond the well-known chronology of Genesis, implying that these creations existed in ages that may be beyond our understanding. According to this framework, the universe is a tapestry of events and a sequence of attempts where divine wisdom gradually emerges rather than a linear narrative. Arriving later, humanity inherits a reality that is older, richer, and more complex than it first seems, and it enters a stage already laden with the echoes of past existence. Because Adam and his descendants enter an already ancient story, knowing that their actions have a profound cosmic context, this understanding elevates the significance of human choice. The Ethiopian story is clarified by ancient myths from nearby civilizations. Gods are said to have created humans from clay or blood in Sumerian and Babylonian texts, frequently after earlier generations had fallen short of the divine standard. According to Egyptian mythology, later life arises from primordial beings that are occasionally chaotic or incomplete. Even though the details of these stories vary, they all acknowledge that creation is a process, sometimes an iterative one, where imperfection and experimentation interact with divine intention. This realization is echoed in the Ethiopian texts, which emphasize that the human story starts in a universe that has already been put to the test, a world that has been prepared through cycles of creation, introspection, and renewal. Ethiopian stories also imply that pre-Adamic world knowledge was purposefully kept for those who could comprehend it. God made sure that humanity would interact with creation on its own terms, free from the overwhelming impact of past events by concealing these histories. The revelation of such histories through books like the Book of Enoch provides a lens through which to understand the moral and spiritual aspects of human existence, in addition to being a source of curiosity. Humanity enters a universe full of precedent, expectation, and responsibility, and the pre-Adamic worlds serve as a reminder that creation has layers and that every age has its own set of difficulties. In the end, the concept of pre-Adamic worlds provides a significant background for comprehending God's decision to use Adam and Eve as the new beginning. Being positioned to inherit a universe that had already been shaped, tested, and prepared, humanity was not a first attempt, but rather a purposeful and thoughtful renewal. The Ethiopian viewpoint emphasizes that our story is a part of a much larger continuum by placing humans within a universe that is rich in complexity, history, and invisible activity. To walk the earth is to enter a world that is already ancient, multi-layered, and imbued with divine purpose. According to this vision, creation is an ongoing story that situates humanity at the nexus of past worlds, present realities, and potential futures, rather than a single, isolated moment. Ethiopian traditions describe a different first Adam, one made entirely of light and unbound by earth, before the well-known tale of Adam made of clay. This Adam was a spiritual being who was ethereal and radiant, a glowing representation of the divine nature. His body was neither rigid nor constrained by any physical laws. Rather, it glowed with the light of heaven, a representation of life untarnished by death or the trials of a worldly existence. According to these texts, the first Adam of light was made to live in the spiritual worlds as a being with unadulterated perception and consciousness who could communicate with the angelic orders and the spiritual dimensions of the cosmos in ways that were impossible for a physical body to do. According to the Ethiopian texts, this glowing Adam is an archetype, a model of humanity as it was meant to be in its most ideal state. This Adam of light possessed harmony, divine knowledge, and an innate sense of connection to everything. The first Adam of light existed in a state of unity with the cosmic order, in contrast to the later earthly Adam, whose awareness would be constrained by senses and limitations. Without the constraints of material existence, he was able to travel between realms, see truths that mortals were not able to see, and experience the fullness of creation. His light served as a reminder that even before the human soul enters a physical vessel, it is intended to reflect the wisdom and glory of its creator. It was a symbol of divine intent. The narrative does not, however, stay solely in the ethereal. A descent from the spiritual to the material is described in Ethiopian mysticism. Later on, this radiant Adam would take on a clay body, a physical form derived from the earth. This transition has several underlying causes. On one level, humanity needed to engage with the world in a tangible way, experience the difficulties of physical life, and fully participate in the earthly narrative. On a deeper level, this shift is an example of divine pedagogy. The eternal and luminous human soul learns to work within the constraints of the material world while maintaining its spiritual core. According to Ethiopian texts, this is a purposeful, holy process that is essential to carrying out the Creator's plan for human stewardship of the planet rather than a sign of degradation. Ethiopian conceptions of human existence are based on Adam's dual nature, which consists of the earthly clay and the spiritual light. The clay form represents temporality, vulnerability, and the possibility of moral and spiritual growth, while the first Adam of light foreshadows the eternal aspect of the human soul. The constant conflict in human life between aspiration and limitation can also be explained by this duality. The body interacts with the physical world, learning, experiencing, and developing through difficulties, while the soul yearns to return to the light. As a reminder that the material and spiritual coexist in the unfolding story of creation, the Ethiopian Bible presents this duality not as a weakness, but as a necessary component of the human journey. This view of Adam as a being of light is enhanced by connections to other traditions. Adam Kadmon is described in ancient Jewish mystical texts as a primordial cosmic man who embodied divine light and original perfection. Adam of light, a being with cosmic significance and spiritual knowledge, comes before the fleshly form in Gnostic texts. Early humans or divine prototypes are depicted as luminous beings before taking on earthly forms, even in some Mesopotamian and Egyptian traditions. The Ethiopian view is consistent with these themes, implying that the notion of an original, radiant humanity is a cross-cultural notion that reflects a common understanding, that the human spirit begins in a world of light before coming into contact with the limitations of material existence. The Ethiopian conception of humanity's spiritual journey also attaches great symbolic significance to the first Adam of light. The soul's initial luminous state acts as a model for moral and spiritual awakening, much like light comes before darkness, and illumination directs perception. According to this vision, a spark of that primordial light, a reflection of the first Adam, is present in every human being. Rediscovering and balancing with this inner radiance is the process of earthly life, with all its hardships and experiences. It highlights that humans are a link between the spiritual and the material, between heaven and earth, rather than just a byproduct of matter. The idea of responsibility and choice is further emphasized by the change from light to clay. According to the Ethiopian texts, Adam voluntarily and consciously assumed a physical body. It makes it possible to exercise free will, obey or disobey, learn from mistakes, and take part in the drama of creation as it plays out. Since the luminous Adam was in an eternal and perfect state, he was unable to fall in the same way as the earthly Adam. However, the earthly form brings with it vulnerability, the potential for mistake, and the chance for moral development. Human life is thus framed as a journey from divine potential to lived experience, from light to clay, and back again, making the story of the first Adam of light inextricably linked to the story of earthly humanity. Ethiopian mysticism also explains how the body-soul relationship is influenced by this dual nature. Adam's inner light is an active force that shapes spiritual perception, intuition, and consciousness. It is not just symbolic. The soul's luminous origin continues to guide and illuminate decisions even after taking on a physical form, providing a source of inner strength and moral clarity. This idea reflects a deep understanding of human nature, where the spiritual and material are complementary rather than antagonistic and have been interwoven since creation. The first Adam of light serves as a living reminder that there is a divine spark that informs, sustains, and ultimately redeems beneath the limitations of physicality. This idea's universality is further supported by connections to other traditions. While some Indian philosophies describe beings of pure consciousness preceding material existence, Zoroastrianism, for example, speaks of primordial light as the first manifestation of creation. Humanity is firmly situated within this larger framework by the Ethiopian story, which presents a vision in which the first Adam of light is not just a theological curiosity, but rather a component of a broader cross-cultural understanding that creation starts with essence, consciousness, and luminosity before matter and mortality. This demonstrates how rich Ethiopian biblical texts are, retaining depths of meaning that are frequently obscured in Western interpretations. Later themes in Scripture are also hinted at in the story of Adam as a light being. The idea that the eternal interacts with the temporal to bring about understanding, redemption, and the accomplishment of purpose is reflected in the descent into clay, which also symbolizes the incarnation of divine presence in human form. Ethiopian texts offer a deep reflection on the relationship between time and eternity, spirit and flesh, and wisdom and action by preserving the memory of a radiant Adam. The first Adam of light serves as both a precursor to earthly humanity and an ongoing source of wisdom, demonstrating that all human existence has the capacity to reflect divine radiance despite physical constraints. By highlighting the fact that humans were never meant to be merely physical, the Ethiopian conception of Adam broadens the meaning of creation. The history of humanity has been entwined with the cosmic and the divine since the first Adam of light. The shift to clay frames the luminous origin as the basis of existential, spiritual, and moral possibility rather than diminishing it. In order to walk a path that connects heaven and earth, light and matter, eternity and temporality, humanity must acknowledge, nurture, and live in harmony with the divine spark that resides within us as descendants of that original light. The Ethiopian texts portray angels as active participants in the world's unfolding story, rather than as detached observers from the very beginning of creation. The first humans were to be guided, taught, and sometimes tested by these celestial beings, which were made of fire and light. They served as both a guardian and an educator, ensuring that people could develop within the framework of divine order and discover the paths of wisdom and righteousness. The Ethiopian Bible stresses a dynamic relationship between angels and humans, where guidance, correction, and even challenge are woven into the human experience from the very beginning. In contrast to the solitary view frequently found in Western scripture, the Watchers are especially important among these angelic beings. They are described as a group of angels sent to watch the earth and report on human affairs in the Book of Enoch, a crucial text in Ethiopian tradition. First and foremost, their function is entirely divine. They are to lead people, teach them, and make sure that creation follows the Creator's plan. But as some watchers start to break the rules out of curiosity and desire, the story soon exposes the intricacies of free will and the frailty of obedience. The first confrontations between divine intent and celestial rebellion are introduced by their moral compromise, laying the groundwork for the lessons humanity would learn in terms of knowledge and consequences. According to Ethiopian literature, these angels are extremely strong and intelligent beings with the ability to affect both the material and spiritual worlds. They lay the groundwork for early civilization by teaching people the fundamentals of astronomy, metallurgy, agriculture, and other fields. But they have two sides to their gifts. The very teachings intended to uplift humanity can be abused, resulting in corruption, arrogance, or disobedience. Knowledge also brings temptation. The dual character of angelic influence highlights a recurrent theme in Ethiopian theology. Divine order is a framework that requires freedom, moral responsibility, and choice to function, rather than just a set of laws imposed from above. Even though angels are bright and wise, they can be judged when they go too far, and humans must use discernment when applying the wisdom they give. Understanding the early human experience requires an understanding of the conflict between angelic rebellion and divine order. According to the Ethiopian texts, some watchers, including well-known individuals like Azazel and Samyaza, do not follow divine orders, bringing forbidden behavior and knowledge into the world. They disturb the balance of creation by marrying human women and imparting knowledge that is not appropriate for mortals. This rebellion has direct repercussions for humanity, planting the seeds of violence, corruption, and moral complexity. It is not just a celestial drama. The benefits and burdens of angelic intervention are passed down to humans, and the continuous conflict between light and shadow, obedience and defiance, becomes an integral part of their story. However, angels are not presented as entirely good or completely hostile. The Ethiopian texts place a strong emphasis on subtlety. While some angels fall prey to pride, desire, or curiosity, others stay faithful, mentoring, and guiding. This intricacy implies that moral clarity is neither straightforward nor automatic, reflecting the human condition itself. The Watcher's presence serves as an example of how temptation can accompany guidance and how discernment, humility, and vigilance are necessary to comprehend divine will. Therefore, angels serve as catalysts for learning, testing, and moral development, and humanity's early decisions are made in the context of both instruction and challenge. In Ethiopian thought, the relationship between humans and angels also emphasizes how the material and spiritual worlds are intertwined. Angels are more than just observers. They actively shape events, affect feelings, and even change the path of history. Placed on the meticulously prepared earth, the first humans come into contact with these entities not as intangible symbols, but as real forces that influence everyday existence, judgment, and comprehension. The knowledge that angels impart, whether it be mystical, agricultural, or technological, illustrates the close connection between the earthly, celestial, and divine realms. Because human abilities, decisions, and moral consciousness are shaped by these encounters, the story of humanity cannot be divorced from the angelic presence, a theme that runs throughout later human history. The Watcher's rebellion also introduces the first idea of consequences for disobedience. The human world is impacted by the actions of certain angels who stray from divine directives. Without the direction of wisdom and self-control, violence, corruption, and spiritual confusion occur, demonstrating that knowledge is insufficient on its own. According to the Ethiopian viewpoint, this is a profound lesson. Responsibility is inextricably linked to power, knowledge, and capability. The story cautions that even celestial beings have responsibility and that humans, despite their greater frailty, must negotiate a moral environment influenced by both divine law and the will of those in higher places. Ethiopian stories also explain how the faithful angels still act as messengers, guardians, and counselors between God and people. Often, Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael are portrayed as directly helping people, giving divine guidance and shielding the faithful from harm and corruption. Their existence reaffirms that the human journey is not solitary, but rather is accompanied by forces that sustain, guide, and correct, and that creation is underpinned by layers of supervision and care. In a rich, dynamic story that places humanity within a larger cosmic drama, this duality, angels, loyalty, and rebellion, makes spiritual beings both companions and challenges on the journey of life. Angels had a profound impact on early humanity that went beyond spiritual awakening to include practical instruction. Humans learned to distinguish between light and shadow, obedience and transgression, and right and wrong through their interactions. According to the Ethiopian texts, these encounters shape people's morals, character, and fate. Even the Watcher's errors and sins have a purpose. They impart lessons about the repercussions of disobedience, the boundaries of knowledge without wisdom, and the eternal significance of being in accordance with divine intent. The earliest phases of human experience are framed as a combination of divine instruction, celestial influence, and moral testing, with humanity inheriting both the benefits and the difficulties of these interactions. The Ethiopian Bible presents a complex and profound view of creation by incorporating angels into the narrative of early human development. Humanity enters a rich, inhabited universe where beings of great strength and wisdom guide and test it rather than just being placed in an empty world. These exchanges highlight the moral stakes involved in knowledge and action, as well as the interdependence of the spiritual and material worlds. As both educators and rebels, the Watchers emphasize the intricacy of creation, the tension between liberty and accountability, and the ways that heavenly order and cosmic influence impact the course of human existence. According to this interpretation, the early stages of human history are tense, instructive, and characterized by the conflict between obedience and rebellion. Angels have always been active participants in human history, influencing the very framework that underpins morality, culture, and spiritual consciousness, rather than being aloof abstractions. Understanding the origins of humanity necessitates acknowledging the significant role of these celestial beings, whose guidance and transgression together set the stage for the unfolding drama of life on earth, according to the Ethiopian texts. According to Ethiopian biblical theory, creation is a purposeful manifestation of divine purpose that began long before the widely accepted Genesis story. According to the texts, the cosmos was purposefully created, with every component thoughtfully placed to carry out a greater cosmic scheme. In this design, humanity plays a major role, not as a passive observer, but as an active agent that connects the material and spiritual worlds. This dual positioning highlights a fundamental idea in Ethiopian theology. Creation serves a relational and functional purpose, connecting the divine and the material world and providing significance to life itself. According to Ethiopian scripture, people are a special combination of matter and spirit. Angels and other celestial beings are mainly found in the invisible world, but humans have both a physical body and a spiritual nature, which enables them to communicate with both worlds. Humans are intended to serve as mediators, caregivers, and co-creators within creation. This dual nature is crucial to comprehending the divine purpose. They are vital contributors to the universe's continuous work because of their ability to discern spiritual truths, make moral decisions, and acquire knowledge. According to this theory, creation was required to create a channel for the manifestation of divine wisdom in the physical world. Additionally, according to the Ethiopian texts, the divine plan existed before any actual act of creation. Light heavens, angels, earth, and humanity are the events that follow a purposeful order, with each step setting the stage for the next. This pre-Genesis blueprint implies that creation is deliberate, a methodically planned progression intended to bring about harmony, knowledge, and moral accountability rather than random or reactive. As the result of this process, humans are in a position to inherit not only the earth, but also the duty of maintaining and expanding the divine plan. Their presence represents the meeting point of temporality and eternity, of infinite knowledge and limited experience. In this light, the significance of humanity's position in the cosmos takes on multiple dimensions. According to Ethiopian theology, people are entrusted with the care and management of the material world, and are therefore stewards of creation. Humans are called to act in accordance with divine principles and to cultivate justice, wisdom, and harmony, making this stewardship not only practical, but also profoundly moral and spiritual. However, their spirituality enables them to gain insight, intuition, and communion with higher truths by connecting them to worlds beyond the material. Therefore, humanity's role is both sacred and functional, connecting the heavens and the earth. In an ongoing, intentional conversation, human experience is also framed as intrinsically meaningful by the divine purpose of creation. Humans function at the intersection of spirit and matter, so every choice, action, and interaction has consequences. According to the Ethiopian texts, life is a meticulously planned setting where people are tested, mentored, and developed to reach their full potential. This viewpoint promotes a dynamic and participatory view of life, in which creation is continuous and people actively contribute to upholding and achieving the divine plan. Through their words, deeds, and thoughts, they help to unfold a cosmic story that predates the measurement of time itself. The moral and ethical aspects of humanity's role are further emphasized in Ethiopian scripture. The existence of free will, the ability to make decisions, and the possibility of both obedience and transgression show that creation was a dynamic system intended for development and responsibility rather than a fixed configuration. As a result, humans are both participants and beneficiaries of divine order. They are in charge of maintaining the integrity of creation while also enjoying its benefits. Allegorical tales and parables are frequently used in Ethiopian texts to highlight the idea that awareness, discernment, and a dedication to aligning with the higher purpose woven throughout existence are necessary for comprehending one's place in the universe. Another essential component of the divine purpose is the interaction between humans and other living things, including animals, angels, and the elements. Angels support human growth and guarantee alignment with divine will by serving as mentors, go-betweens, and occasionally testers. Despite not having the same level of consciousness, animals and the natural world have a purpose in the greater scheme of things, helping to maintain equilibrium, provide nourishment, and have symbolic meaning. As the focal point, humanity must balance these relationships, acknowledge the interdependence of all creation, and behave in a way that reflects the Creator's wisdom. In this way, the Ethiopian conception of creation integrates spiritual, ethical, and ecological aspects, making it incredibly holistic. Ethiopian theology also highlights that creation is about realization rather than just existence. By bridging the gap between what is and what could be, humans are destined to realize latent potential. This development is foreseen by the divine plan, which offers both structure and freedom, challenge and direction. Humans contribute to the continuous fulfillment of creation's purpose by using moral judgment, seeking knowledge, and cultivating spiritual insight. Their deeds have spiritual as well as material resonance, reflecting a system where each decision either aligns or deviates from divine intent. Understanding this goal requires an understanding of time as it is introduced in pre-Genesis narratives. The temporal framework in which creation takes place enables human learning, experience, and evolution. The Ethiopian texts emphasize that time is inextricably linked to the divine plan, even though it is a construct of the physical world. Awareness, moral discernment, and spiritual maturity are all fostered by the order of creation, the course of life, and the cycles of growth and decay. Because it connects the eternal plan with lived experience, humanity's temporal existence is therefore a necessary component of achieving the goal envisioned before time itself was created. The divine purpose also makes the function of education and knowledge clear in this framework. Humans are not left on their own. They are given guidance by angels, knowledge of the natural world, and moral values to help them live their lives. These instruments, which allow people to act responsibly and with awareness, are essential to the realization of creation's purpose. However, the Ethiopian texts also emphasize the fine line between ethical restraint and empowerment, warning that knowledge devoid of moral alignment can be harmful. To reach their full potential within the divine plan, humans, who serve as the link between spirit and matter, must practice discernment. Humanity is ultimately portrayed as central, active, and responsible in the Ethiopian conception of the divine purpose of creation. Life is framed as a complex interplay between spiritual insight and material engagement, with humans positioned to embody the Creator's wisdom while navigating the challenges of physical existence. Intentionality, moral responsibility, and relationality are emphasized in the pre-Genesis plan, which presents humans as the result of a meticulously planned cosmic design rather than as accidental byproducts. Humans are called to acknowledge their role, take responsibility, and help continue to realize the purpose of creation in all spheres: spiritual, intellectual, ethical, and practical. One's perspective on human existence is altered by this realization. Life is not a singular or sporadic event, but rather a vast interwoven story in which humanity is both a participant and a steward. This story is carefully framed in Ethiopian texts, which show that the goal of creation is to promote wisdom, harmony, and alignment between spirit and matter. Every human action, thought, and decision participates in this divine plan, echoing the vision set forth before Genesis and resonating throughout the unfolding tapestry of the universe. A wealth of writings that preserve mysteries long concealed from mainstream Christian traditions can be found in the Ethiopian Bible, which contains a collection of texts that are mainly unknown to the West. These include the Apocalypse of Abraham, the Book of Jubilees, the Book of Enoch, and 2 Esdras. Each of these provides a different perspective on creation, the heavens, and the first encounters between humans and God. Because they were frequently written off as apocryphal or unreliable, these texts were either left out of or marginalized in the Western canon. They have, however, been painstakingly preserved in Ethiopia and are an essential component of the historical and spiritual narrative that questions accepted notions of Genesis and the universe's beginnings. Perhaps the most well-known of these obscure writings is the Book of Enoch, which explores in great detail pre-Genesis events such as the formation of the heavens, the angelic orders, and the mysterious watchers. It gives thorough explanations of how some angels rebelled, how they taught humanity forbidden knowledge, and how the corruption that resulted from this required divine intervention. The Ethiopian version of Enoch presents a striking picture of a world brimming with spiritual activity long before Adam and Eve were created, in contrast to the Western Bible, which makes scant mention of these events. It presents a universe alive with interaction between the divine, celestial, and earthly realms through symbolic narratives and intricate cosmology. In addition to Enoch, the Book of Jubilees provides a chronological account of creation and the early history of humanity, emphasizing the structure and order that underlie divine purposes. Jubilees presents creation as a methodically planned unfolding, rather than a single sudden event, and it offers a wealth of genealogical information, timelines, and moral guidance. It explains how the world was formed physically, as well as how spiritual laws, covenantal relationships, and divine oversight were established to influence human life from the very beginning. The Ethiopian canon provides context that is lacking in condensed Western collections by maintaining this text, guaranteeing that the continuity of divine purpose is understandable and accessible. Another of these hidden texts, Esdras, examines prophetic visions that reflect on the destiny of the universe, humanity, and the divine plan that transcends current historical events. Its inclusion in the Ethiopian Bible emphasizes the tradition's receptivity to visionary experiences and recognition that revelation frequently serves as a medium for human comprehension of divine intent. 2. Esdras reinforces themes of judgment, accountability, and cosmic justice by offering commentary on the ethical and spiritual aspects of creation. It places humanity in a broader context by demonstrating that the world's creation was not just a physical act, but also a moral and spiritual code that governs human behavior. Another level of understanding is provided by the Apocalypse of Abraham, which combines cosmology, prophecy, and mystical experience. It describes Abraham's visions of spiritual worlds, heavenly judgment, and celestial hierarchies, highlighting the connection between cosmic order and human behavior. The Ethiopian texts make clear through these stories that the events leading up to Genesis were not merely mythical or historical, but rather profoundly symbolic, meant to enlighten, caution, and educate. They portray creation as a multifaceted process involving the intertwining of human, angelic, and spiritual forces, as well as the repercussions of knowledge, obedience, and rebellion on both the material and spiritual planes. Ethiopia has a long history of protecting ancient knowledge, which is directly related to the country's preservation of these texts. Ethiopia maintained a wider, more inclusive approach than Western traditions, where councils and theological discussions resulted in the selection of a limited canon. This has made it possible to preserve teachings that oppose reductionist, linear narratives and present an expansive, multi-layered, and incredibly complex picture of creation. These books, which are frequently overlooked elsewhere, offer vital background information for comprehending the beginning of time, the formation of heavenly orders, and the rise of humanity as a major player in the divine scheme. These hidden books shed light on pre-Genesis events in ways that challenge accepted wisdom. They tell of creatures that existed before humans, worlds that existed before Adam, and cosmic conflicts that prepared the way for the physical universe. For instance, Enoch describes the characteristics and order of angels, the fallout from their disobedience, and the complex workings of divine rule. Jubilees places a strong emphasis on laws, covenants, and chronology, placing humanity's place in the larger scheme of cosmic events. Unto Esdras and the Apocalypse of Abraham elucidate moral and visionary aspects, demonstrating the inseparability of spiritual consciousness, prophecy, and moral behavior from the very fabric of creation. These texts have a profound cumulative effect, implying that creation is not just a point in time, but rather a part of a continuous story that predates what is conventionally regarded as the beginning. According to Ethiopian theology, human existence is both the result and steward of divine intention in a dynamic, interconnected, and morally charged universe. Understanding pre-Genesis events helps us understand the beginnings of time, light, angelic orders, and the spiritual framework that supports physical reality. It emphasizes how the world that humanity inherits is shaped not just by matter and energy, but also by predetermined cosmic, ethical, and spiritual structures. Ethiopia guarantees that the lessons, cautions, and revelations of pre-Genesis events will always be available to those who are prepared to study them by conserving these texts. By pushing readers to look beyond oversimplified stories, the works promote contemplation of the moral obligations that come with being human and the deep connections between the spiritual and material worlds. They portray creation as a complex tapestry with meaning, consequences, and purpose woven throughout the actions of angels, people, and divine forces. Much of this depth has been hidden by these books' exclusion from the Western canon. Ethiopian tradition, on the other hand, accepts the completeness of these stories and recognizes that comprehending the origin and purpose of humanity necessitates addressing ambiguity, mystery, and complexity. In doing so, the Ethiopian Bible offers a more complex and nuanced picture of creation, where the emergence of the material world and the arrival of humanity are framed by pre-Genesis events, angelic interactions, and cosmic structures. The Ethiopian canon preserves access to teachings that shed light on the early phases of life through the preservation of Enoch, Jubilees, 2 Esdras, and the Apocalypse of Abraham. These writings are living windows into a worldview that combines cosmology, morality, and human purpose rather than being merely historical oddities. They show that before Genesis, the universe was already teeming with purpose, conflict, and order, and that the coming of humanity was both foreseen and essential to a plan that goes beyond traditional ideas of beginning and end. In the end, the Ethiopian Bible's protection of these obscure texts emphasizes the country's function as a repository of spiritual wisdom. It preserves stories that show the intricacies of creation, the connections between the human and celestial worlds, and the ethical and spiritual difficulties that come with power and knowledge. Studying these writings helps one understand the cosmic plan, pre-Genesis events, and the reasons why, according to a tradition that has preserved its secrets for thousands of years, humanity holds a special, unique, and sacred place in the universe. We start to realize that the creation story is much richer and more intricate than the straightforward account we are frequently taught in the West, as we consider the journey through the hidden pre-Genesis mysteries preserved in the Ethiopian Bible. Each layer reveals a universe alive with intention, struggle, and unfolding purpose, from the beginning of time itself to the creation of the heavens, the appearance of angels, the rebellion that preceded humanity, and the creation of the first Adam of light, These old visions ask us to view our own lives in a much broader context, where the material and spiritual, the visible and invisible, are always interacting. They serve as a reminder that life is more than just surviving. It is taking part in a universe where decisions, deeds, and awareness have significance and weight. The Ethiopian texts demonstrate that creation was a sequence of intentional actions, each with moral and spiritual components, rather than a single, isolated event. In ways that are directly related to the human experience, time itself, the heavens, and the earthly realm were set in motion. These timeless lessons still have an impact on how we perceive time, make decisions, and maintain hope in our modern lives. The issues we face today are still shaped by the same queries that pre-Genesis humanity had: obedience, accountability, and the effects of knowledge. By reading these texts, we are reminded that wisdom is not only timeless, but also immediately applicable. It deals with how we make decisions for ourselves, develop understanding, and work to live in accordance with values that go beyond the ordinary. The stories of angels and celestial order, the trials of early worlds, and the emergence of humanity as a bridge between spirit and matter offer insight into how we might view our role in the modern world. In one way or another, we are all called to acknowledge the duty that comes with our role, to take care of the planet, to respect the spiritual aspects of life, and to approach our interactions with awareness and purpose. According to the Ethiopian Bible, the purpose of creation is continuous and participatory. It's possible that the universe is still developing both inside and outside of us, continuously urging introspection, development, and involvement. As we reflect on our position in the universe, this open-ended perspective fosters humility, curiosity, and awe. These pre-Genesis stories contain ethical, philosophical, and practical lessons in addition to spiritual ones. They remind us that even seemingly insignificant actions have an impact on larger systems and challenge us to think critically about knowledge, power, and influence. The Ethiopian texts challenge us to think about the repercussions of disobedience and compliance, the worth of wisdom and discernment, and the significance of being in accord with higher ideals. These old tales provide a counterbalance to a world that is frequently dominated by distraction and immediacy, by highlighting introspection, accountability, and the more profound patterns that influence our lives and societies. We encourage viewers to actively interact with these concepts as we wrap up this investigation. In order to help us reach 10,000 subscribers, please think about subscribing to this channel and forwarding this video to your friends and family if these insights into pre-Genesis mysteries speak to you. Your support via Super Thanks also allows us to continue creating content that uncovers the wisdom of the Ethiopian Bible and other hidden texts. As it unites our global audience in common curiosity and discovery, please share your name, city, and the time you watch this video in the comments section below. The description offers direct access to the texts that shed light on these pre-Genesis mysteries for those who want to delve deeper into these teachings. These include the complete 88 Books Ethiopian Bible and the Book of Enoch in English. The wisdom of Ethiopia's sacred tradition informs not only our knowledge of the past, but also our decisions and aspirations for the present and future. By studying these works, we continue the process of introspection and understanding. Maybe, as these texts imply, creation is still taking place inside of us, a living narrative in which we are encouraged to take part on a daily basis. What if the story of creation did not begin with Genesis? That question alone is enough to shake the very foundation of what most of the world has been taught about beginnings. For centuries, billions of people have grown up with the Western Bible's account. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But what if another story, far older, hidden away in ancient scrolls and guarded by generations, gives us a very different starting point? Across deserts, mountains, and seas, cultures have struggled with the same question. Where did we come from? How did all of this begin? From the earliest cave drawings to the most complex theological debates, humanity has never stopped searching for its origin. And yet, buried in Ethiopia, preserved in manuscripts that survived fire, invasion, and centuries of silence, lies a different version of the beginning, one that challenges the West's Genesis-centered creation story. This isn't just about religion. It's about identity, truth, and power. Because whoever controls the beginning controls the meaning of life itself. If one book says humanity began in one way, and another book, equally sacred, says it began differently, what does that do to our understanding of ourselves? That's the question that sets this story apart from anything you've ever heard in a Sunday sermon. The Ethiopian Bible is not just a variation of the Western Bible. It is a library of texts, some of which the Western world has never accepted, suppressed, or outright rejected. Books like Enoch, Jubilees, and the full story of Adam and Eve stretch the boundaries of what we thought we knew. When you open these pages, you don't just find familiar verses, you find stories that rewrite the story of creation itself. Imagine a world before time, where angels walked among humans, where creation was not just a single spoken command, but a layered, multi-dimensional act involving heavenly beings and cosmic battles. Imagine that before Genesis, another script had already been written, one that the Ethiopian Bible still preserves. Think about it. The Western Bible we know today has gone through councils, translations, and countless edits. But the Ethiopian tradition has held on to books that the rest of the world abandoned. Why? Did they see something worth protecting? Did they know truths that others tried to erase? And what happens when those hidden truths are brought back to light? The very fact that this alternative story exists means that creation is not a one-dimensional tale. It forces us to face uncomfortable questions. If Genesis is not the only beginning, what else might we have missed? Could there be more to Adam and Eve, more to the fall, more to the very idea of what it means to be human? This is not just history. This is about us, today. We live in a world filled with confusion, endless choices, and constant struggles over truth. People look for meaning in science, in philosophy, in religion, and in themselves. Yet the question of beginnings still haunts us. If the story is incomplete, then so is our understanding of life. And if the Ethiopian Bible holds missing pieces, maybe, just maybe, it also holds the answers we've been searching for. The suspense is not in whether these stories exist. They do. The suspense lies in what they mean and why they were hidden. Were they removed to protect people from truths too heavy to bear? Or were they erased because they gave power to those the world wanted to silence? The answers are not simple, but they matter. Because every person who has ever asked, "Why am I here?" is connected to this mystery. This documentary will walk you through those lost pages. It will take you to the shadowy places where angels and humans met, to the stories of creation before Genesis, and to the cosmic struggles that shaped what we now call the human story. And it will not leave you with easy answers, because the truth rarely comes packaged that way. But before we step into that ancient world, pause for a moment and think about the world we live in right now. Think about how fragile truth has become. In a time when information is everywhere and lies spread faster than facts, the courage to seek the real story is more important than ever. And that is why this journey matters, not just to believers, not just to historians, but to anyone who refuses to live by half-truths. So let's begin, not with Genesis, but with the question before time. What if the story of creation did not start where we've been told, And before we dive deeper into this journey together, I have a small request. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, if you want to be part of uncovering the truths the world has forgotten, then help this channel grow. Subscribe today and help us reach 10,000 subscribers. If you want to show extra support, you can tap the Super Thanks button. It helps keep documentaries like this alive. And I would love to hear from you. Comment below with your name, your city, and the exact time you're watching this. It's a small way for us to see how this hidden history is reaching people across the world. And if you want to go even further, check out the link in the description where you can find the complete 88 Books Ethiopian Bible along with the Book of Enoch. These are not just books, they are windows into a forgotten beginning. One of the most amazing treasures in human history,